Our skies are full of mysteries. Unidentified flying objects secretly investigated by government agencies all over Europe for decades.
There was a cover-up in the early 1950s because pilots were seeing strange things. They couldn't explain all of them, but they didn't want that information reaching the public.
For the first time, we've collated sightings and reports from across an entire continent. Some experts insist many sightings have rational explanations. But some continue to defy understanding.
I had never seen anything like it. I never saw anything like it after that. And if you say to me, what do I think I was looking at? I haven't the vaguest idea.
Are these visitors from other worlds or natural phenomena? And do our European governments know more than they ever reveal to us? The answer may lie in the untold stories of the UFO files of Europe. Amidst the thousands of UFO sightings, some have been more influential than others. Strange events surrounding a NATO exercise changed the way Western governments deal with their UFO cases. The lives of scores of witnesses are affected by a metallic tentacled object hovering over them for almost an hour. And a Romanian village is blacked out, and a wedding ruined after lights are seen in the sky. Alfena, Portugal, 10th of September, 1990. A group of children spot a strange UFO hovering just 50 meters off the ground. The sighting terrifies residents. And brings notoriety to this small, close-knit community.
This event in Alfena, since 1990, is remembered as an extraordinary event.
4 photographs taken that day continue to defy explanation, and the case remains one of the most baffling in Portuguese history. It is more than 20 years since the Alfena UFO incident, but strange events that shocked the community haven't been forgotten.
This case is very important because it was witnessed by dozens of people. It all started on a Monday, 8:30 a.m.
A group of children on their way to school are the first to see the flying object.
It was a round-shaped, very bright, shiny object, flying very low, and the children kept asking, "What is it? What is it?"
But this is barely the beginning of an extraordinary morning in Alfena. Shortly after the children's sighting, the UFO is spotted by local construction workers.
Pegaram em algumas pedras e tentaram atirar o objeto.
The workers threw the stones like in a basic animal response. They thought, is this going to land?
As the UFO moves over the central part of town, residents begin to fear what may be about to happen. Manuel Costa first sees the object near his home.
Assustei-me de ter estava o meu neto aqui e disse, ai filho, se calhar vem botar bombas aqui.
Costa's daughter, Paulina, recalls the events vividly.
Eu estava aqui precisamente neste sítio, quando reparei que nesta direção assim, vinha bastante alto uma coisa a espelhar, muito brilhante, sempre assim nesta direção, aqui, e à medida que se ia aproximando ia baixando de altitude, sempre a baixar de altitude, sempre em direção, sempre por aqui abaixo. Assim, deu a sensação de que ali, naquele local, ia baixar.
But the UFO doesn't land. Instead, it moves towards the football field, and panic spreads through the town. Local photojournalist Manuel Gomes is eating breakfast at a cafe when he hears about the strange events happening in the sky.
Someone called him, say, please come, please come. He came outside, he saw the object, grabbed a 35mm camera.
Gomes races through the town with his camera, desperate to get a photo of the UFO. At 9:15 a.m., 45 minutes after the children first saw the object, Gomes arrives at the football field.
É num desses momentos que o senhor Manuel Gomes, fotógrafo, faz conjunto, uma sequência de 4 fotos.
And this is what he saw.
"22 years on from the event, UFO investigator Francisco Correa has come to the location where the iconic photos were taken. He is meeting a key witness, football club director David Silva.
Aquilo era feito, material seria feito ou alumínio ou inox, porque na altura havia um dia de sol, portanto o dia de sol estava no nascente e batia no aparelho, no objeto e refletia.
After hovering for about a minute, the object disappears over the horizon. The following day, a team of investigators arrive in Alfena to gather witness statements. It becomes clear that witnesses are puzzled by what they've seen.
As pessoas tentavam, digamos, definir aquilo que estavam a ver. Uma delas é que o objeto parecia uma tartaruga com pernas. Os trabalhadores da construção civil compararam o objeto a uma betoneira, portanto, que é um artefacto que eles utilizam no seu trabalho no dia a dia.
Some provide drawings of the object, but one man has the key piece of evidence: Manuel Gomes, the photographer.
Pareceu-nos na altura e depois subsequentemente que era uma pessoa perfeitamente equilibrada, que não estaria à procura de publicidade, porque se disponibilizou desde logo a ceder-nos os negativos, e isto é muito importante.
Investigators realize that analysis of the photographs may help to unlock the mystery. The first pressing question: are the photographs genuine? Photography expert Paul Ellis has studied the images.
I must say it is a peculiar looking object, and these photographs don't, to my mind, have any initial feel of darkroom trickery. One of the reasons I think these may be authentic photographs is simply that they're colour. Colour photographs are much more difficult to fake and trick. An important clue to its authenticity, or possible authenticity, is in the enlargement, because the enlargement shows real detail of highlights, the shadows are still in the right place. This would be really hard to fake in the darkroom. I really feel this is a genuine object in the sky. No idea what the object is, but it does have a sense of authenticity about it.
So if the photos are genuine, what was in the sky that day? Investigators explore the possibility that the UFO could have been a weather balloon. But meteorologist Thomas Schaffernacker is not convinced.
It certainly doesn't look like a standard weather balloon to me. For example, it has these strange tentacles hanging from the bottom. I certainly wouldn't expect to see those on a standard weather balloon.
And there is something about the UFO's behavior that makes investigators think that this is not simply a balloon blowing in the breeze.
O objeto tem conjunto de evoluções e de paragens, portanto, ele movimenta-se, mas também tem momentos em que está estacionário.
But the most interesting thing is that it hovered in the same position for a very long time. Now, a weather balloon tends to go up or be carried by the wind. Anybody knows that. If you let a balloon out, it will just be taken away. This one stayed there for a very long time.
So what was this object? Appearing to be solid and metallic, maneuvering at low altitude above the town. Researchers finally turned their attention to the military.
The other possibility, of course, is that this was some form of drone. Drones are universally known as unmanned aerial vehicles used by the military to carry out a whole range of intelligence gathering operations.
Chris Yates is an aviation analyst who sees similarities between the Alfena UFO and unmanned aerial vehicles.
UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, are highly maneuverable. They can be moved to any given position that you have a desire to monitor.
Yates believes that an untrained eye could be confused if confronted with a military drone.
UAVs are some of the strangest aircraft flying. We're talking about aerial vehicles that don't conform necessarily to the shapes that we've all become accustomed to in terms of aircraft and helicopters. So it would have come as a surprise to villagers to see one of these things hovering over, manoeuvring around.
In 1990, there were 7 NATO air bases in Portugal. Investigators wanted to know whether a drone or a UAV had been flown over Alfena that day.
Foi possível, na altura, também contactarmos a Força Aérea Portuguesa, no sentido de tentarmos saber se em território português, naquele momento, haveria algum tipo de artefacto voador a ser experimentado, por exemplo, no âmbito da NATO.
They didn't have to wait long for a reply.
Que, pelo menos em Portugal, naquele momento, não havia objetos que estavam a ser experimentados, objetos, digamos, do âmbito militar.
Despite a thorough investigation, to this day, nobody knows what terrified the residents of Alfena.
Digamos que, assim em termos de remate, poderemos dizer que estamos na presença, ainda hoje, de um fenómeno aéreo que continua não identificado, aquilo que vulgarmente nós chamamos de OVNI.
The Cold War, a time of ultimate tension. The early 1950s saw the Soviet forces grow ever stronger and threaten to overrun Europe. Everyone was carefully watching and jealously guarding their airspace.
During the height of the Cold War, the Russians were coming down, they were testing our defences the whole time. Things really did get quite tense here.
With both sides fully aware that a misidentification of their own aircraft could lead to a Third World War.
Up until now, the UK government has paid little attention to flying saucers, but that's about to change. Operation Mainbrace, Western Europe, 14th to the 25th of September 1952. The government finds it hard to ignore what happens as the NATO training exercise unfolds.
During Operation Mainbrace, there was a whole series of sightings of flying saucers, not only by some of the crews of the aircraft carriers who were taking part in the exercise, but also by some of the Royal Air Force crews.
The sightings were to produce a radical change in the Ministry of Defence's attitude to unidentified flying objects.
That's when you see some of the governments of Western Europe taking the subject of UFOs very, very seriously. They wanted to know, was there any chance that these things could be from behind the Iron Curtain?
It's the last 2 weeks of September 1952. Operation Mainbrace sees the full force of NATO's air and sea power patrolling the waters around Northern Europe. Journalist and academic David Clarke is an authority on the mysterious goings-on during this time.
It was a simulated exercise. What would happen if the Russians ever attacked, coming over the Arctic Circle with their aircraft and their ships?
Bornholm, Denmark, 13th of September, 1952. Danish destroyer Vilmos is on patrol as part of Operation Mainbrace. Lieutenant Commander Smith Jensen, another officer, and a press photographer are on the ship's bridge. Suddenly, they hear a whistling noise. Smith Jensen's son, Niels, recalls what his father told him about that night.
They hear this noise and look up and see this 3 spots, green, white spots coming in a triangle. It was 3 lights hanging together. It was something that was one item.
Emitting a bluish glow, the object zips over their heads. Its speed is estimated at more than 1,500 kilometers per hour. 3 seconds later, it's out of sight. Immediately, Smith Jensen races below deck to the officers' mess.
He goes down to the first commander and tells the story, and they all laugh at him. But then the other people come down and verify the story.
Several journalists reporting on the NATO exercise were on the ship that night and were keen to find out more. Ole Henningsen is a veteran researcher at the Scandinavian UFO Information Society in Denmark.
One of the newspaper guys later on, they asked him, could you have hit this object? Could you have shooten it down? Smith Jensen, he laughed and he said, no, of course I couldn't, because there was a press photographer right beside me, and he couldn't even take a photograph. It was away for only a few seconds.
What could have been moving so fast across the sky? Among the obvious explanations is a NATO aircraft taking part in the exercise, or a Soviet plane shadowing the military maneuvers.
Well, they ask, of course, NATO, was this something coming from them, or was it a Russian item that they didn't know about? There was a lot of speculations, but nobody came with an answer. Nobody had an answer.
Just 6 days later, with Operation Mainbrace in full swing, there's yet another peculiar UFO sighting. RAF Topcliffe, England, 19th of September, 1952. It is shortly before 11 a.m. RAF personnel watch a Meteor aircraft coming into land. They spot something unusual, following about 8 kilometers behind it.
And they thought initially, oh no, there's been some kind of accident. It's the cowling from the aircraft or something from the aircraft that's come away and that's falling to earth, because this thing appeared to be following the aircraft and then descending. As they watched, they realised that this wasn't the case, this was an actual flying object, and it appeared to fall in like a falling leaf motion.
The silvery object sways back and forth like a pendulum at an altitude of about 5,000 meters. But as the Meteor begins circling, the disc-shaped UFO stops and hovers in the air. It starts to rotate.
And then it just went zoom and disappeared at some fantastic speed, and at that moment they knew this wasn't something that they'd seen before.
Nobody can find a rational explanation for the sighting. No cowling or parachute descends in the area. The experienced airmen watching claim it looks nothing like any aircraft they've ever seen, and it seems to move faster than a shooting star. The media attention the sighting receives has a lasting impact on the government's approach to the subject of UFOs.
This was before there was any restrictions on Air Force personnel talking to the media. It got immediately into the press. The pilots who'd seen this thing were interviewed by the national media, and the government then was forced into a position it had to do something, or it had to at least appear on the surface to be taking this subject seriously. So Operation Mainbrace was a real turning point, and that was the moment at which the British government thought, we do need to take this subject seriously. It's not going away. Whatever is behind this, we've got to keep monitoring it. And that's when the British government sets up a highly secret unit in air intelligence that kept tabs on this subject.
Air intelligence soon have other cases to investigate. USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, North Sea, 20th of September, 1952.
On this aircraft carrier, there was a photographer from the American news media, Wallace Litwin. He reported that he'd taken a photograph of what he thought was a flying saucer.
The UFO is a white spherical object seen moving in the sky behind the fleet. In 1974, UFO investigator Ule Henningsen tracks down Wallace Litwin and receives a letter describing exactly what he'd seen that day.
Well, Mr. Litwin, he sent me a letter, and he writes, when I had taken the 3 or 4 shots, I went below to the officers' lounge, where I jokingly announced to the correspondents there that I had shot a flying saucer.
When you look at the photographs today, they're pretty indistinct. You can hardly identify the object that he said was the flying saucer. But the people on the aircraft carrier were quite concerned about what he said he'd seen, quite naturally, because this is a secret military exercise.
So what could Litwin have seen that got the military so worried? The letter reveals the photographer initially thought he'd pictured one of the weather balloons regularly released by the FD Roosevelt and her sister ships. But none of those balloons could possibly have been in the area at that time. Whatever the truth of the Litwin photograph, one thing's indisputable. There were many witnesses to UFOs in Western Europe during the month of September 1952. What could possibly explain this surge of sightings? Perhaps a freak rush of astronomical phenomena while Operation Mainbrace was underway?
In the case of Mainbrace, I don't think we can look for an astronomical explanation. Most of these sightings apparently occurred during the daytime, and there really isn't anything astronomical that's that bright in the daytime sky. And we can't explain it by orbital debris, because this was 1952, and that was 5 years before the first satellite went into orbit, so it can't be a satellite coming down or rockets coming down that have launched satellites into orbit.
People were becoming more aware of the possibility of life on other planets.
What was growing in the background was a public belief, massive public belief, in aliens from outer space, and that was encouraged by popular culture. 1951, we had the day that the Earth stood still, which was all about an alien civilization that sent an emissary to Earth. But in the 1950s, and many scientists believe that there may be intelligent life on Mars. So it wasn't such a huge leap to imagine that they could be visiting us. And reflecting the international tensions of the Cold War, people naturally expected the aliens to be hostile, because it was almost a reflection of what they expected to happen if the Russians ever invaded.
The wave of sightings in 1952 is far from over. Just a month later, a UFO spotted over Britain brings suggestions of a government cover-up. It's October 1952. Over the past 30 days, many witnesses across Europe have reported UFO sightings. The wave of strange events coincides with a major military exercise. There are sightings from both military ships and Royal Air Force personnel, which forces the UK government to take the whole subject of UFOs more seriously than ever before. But yet another, even more puzzling UFO mystery is about to unfold. Little Rissington, England, 21st of October, 1952. RAF Flight Lieutenant Michael Swinney is a highly experienced pilot examiner and trainer at the military's Central Flying School. His working life is routine, until the day he almost runs headlong into 3 flying saucers.
I had never seen anything like it. I never saw anything like it after that. And if you say to me, what do I think I was looking at? I haven't the vaguest idea, and I wish I had.
On that eventful afternoon 60 years ago, Flight Lieutenant Swinney is flying with Naval Officer David Crofts. Their planned sortie will take them to an altitude of around 10,000 meters, flying a triangular cross-country route.
We climbed up through some cloud and eventually broke out into clear weather at about, I think, 14,000, 15,000 feet. And it was shortly after that that I noticed in the windscreen, directly in front, 3 circular white or off-white objects.
Swinney initially fears that he is seeing fellow airmen floating down on parachutes.
I grabbed control of the aircraft because I thought if I wasn't careful, I'd go straight through the middle of them.
But the objects moved to the right.
We were trying desperately to find some reason for seeing what we were seeing.
Swinney and Crofts radio into the control tower and are told to stand by.
They had no idea what to tell me. There didn't appear to be any sort of standard operating procedure at that time. In case people did call in to say, I have 3 unidentified aircraft in front of me, give me some instructions.
They were absolutely perfect, translucent objects, no sign of propulsion systems, no windows, in echelon formation, and they watched them for some time.
The pilots watched the objects for 10 minutes, but eventually they vanish.
I looked away for a matter of a second or 2, and when I looked back, there was nothing to be seen. They had just disappeared.
What the pilots didn't know at the time was that the UFOs had also been picked up by ground-controlled interception radar.
That one fact has always come back to me, and I've said to myself, just believe in what you saw, because somebody else with some pretty high-powered equipment saw it at the same time.
The military takes the incident very seriously. In the tense international climate, all unidentified radar blips are treated as potentially hostile.
Fighter Command scrambled aircraft to go and investigate, but these things disappeared off the radar screen before any action could be taken.
The scrambled jets failed to make any contact. Swinney and Crofts make an uneventful flight back to Little Rissington Airfield. But the incident had affected them deeply.
I was told that I looked particularly shaken, as if I'd almost seen a ghost.
The Air Ministry had learned lessons from the press coverage of a UFO sighting at RAF Base Topcliffe a month earlier. To avoid further publicity, they handled this UFO case very differently.
Both the pilots were immediately separated, told not to talk to each other. A group of investigators from the Air Ministry came, interviewed them separately, took statements from them, and obviously there was some kind of investigation that was going on in the background.
The Air Ministry conducts a classified inquiry, but their conclusion is made public. There is no evidence for otherworldly UFOs. Case closed.
The Air Ministry concluded that there was no evidence of extraterrestrial craft. How they concluded that remains a mystery.
Michael Swinney has been trying to find the classified report ever since.
My big gripe is that the report that I wrote, I tried to recover and was told that because it was written when it was, 1952, that subsequently reports up to 67 or thereabouts were in fact shredded. I was never told anything.
The government never revealed the details of their investigation to the public, not even to the witnesses.
It's gone on year after year after year with no resolution in sight.
So all we're left with is that one entry, the memories of the two pilots who also made entries in their personal flying logs of the sightings.
I've just written 3 flying saucers at height confirmed by GCI.
So did the files contain information the government wasn't prepared to share? Or has the report disappeared because of simple human error?
There was a cover-up in the early 1950s, but that was simply common sense on behalf of the military. Because they thought, if we just simply say to the public at large, people are seeing these things that are called flying saucers, if you've seen one, tell us about it. And they knew that if they did that, they wouldn't get anywhere because they'd just be inundated with hundreds and hundreds of letters. So they thought, if there's any truth to this, the only way we're going to get to the bottom of it is if we concentrate on what we know is the credible evidence.
Sadly, without the original report, Swinney may never discover what it was he saw that day.
It's the thought that I had this experience 60 years ago and will never know what I saw. I mean, to me, everything would be revealed if only somebody could find my report.
In a remote Romanian village, a wedding is in full swing. Suddenly, a massive power blackout brings the celebrations crashing to a halt. When villagers go to investigate, they are greeted by a surreal sight illuminating the night sky.
Și mai mi s-a părut un neregul. Era un fenomen care nu l-am văzut niciodată în viața mea până acum.
Witnesses are captivated by the bizarre events.
Am gândit că cineva se joacă. Cineva care are o tehnologie foarte avansată.
We have here in Romania an incredible case which the world should see.
Nănești, Romania, 30th of June 2001. This remote village lies in eastern Romania. It's an important day for new bride Stella Necula and her mother Magiola Angel. At 10:30 p.m., Necula and her new husband are enjoying a wedding feast with their families. Suddenly, the festivities are interrupted when the power cuts out.
Prima dată am zis că cineva ne-a făcut o glumă. Am văzut că a trecut o oră, 2. Deja am intrat în panică și ne-am gândit și la altceva.
But this is no prank. The blackout is affecting other parts of the village. Professor Tanasake Agafets is relaxing at home with his wife.
Când deodată se întrerupe curentul și, așteptând câteva minute, ne-am gândit ce se întâmplă, să vedem dacă e numai la noi sau și la vecini.
Outside, the night sky is black and still. The power cut has plunged the entire village into darkness. Agafets takes the opportunity to look up at the stars.
Și, uitându-mă în direcția nord, am observat un obiect mișcător care se deplasa dinspre nord încoace.
What the object does next is completely unexpected.
S-a poziționat acolo și după câteva secunde a început să emită un cerc luminos întrerupt, cerc luminos care se deplasa către pământ, lărgindu-se tot mai mult, doar cu o viteză din ce în ce mai mare, până când a ajuns, eu așa am zis, că a cuprins tot satul.
At the same moment, agricultural mechanic Dumitru Jujau is cycling to his home in Nanești when he also notices the red glow in the sky.
Mă zic, ce cu ea, mă, ce cu lumina asta? Eram curios, dacă nu era lumină în tot satul, zic, ce se întâmplă oare? Se desfăcea larg, cu multe ferestre așa, decât late. Și stătea câteva minute, stăteam și mă uitam așa, de singur.
For nearly 2 hours, the phenomenon sends strange beams of light down over the village before disappearing. Over the following days, the story is reported in the press. Romanian UFO investigators descend on the area looking for witnesses. Among them is former military sergeant George Kohal. Initially, residents are reluctant to discuss the events.
România, ca și în alte locuri, există o problemă. Oamenii nu prea vor să vorbească despre aceste fenomene observate, o parte dintre ei nu vor să vorbească, pentru că sunt interpretați de ceilalți săteni ca niște ciudați, ca oameni efectiv nebuni, care au viziuni.
But it soon becomes apparent that this was an extraordinary occurrence.
Acest caz are 7 martori oficiali care au fost intervievați, dar presupunem că există peste 50 de martori care au observat fenomenul, deci reprezintă un caz de observație în masă a unui fenomen luminos cu caracteristicile OZN.
Is it possible that the strange lights could have been caused by something not in the sky, but from within the Earth?
Zona respectivă, zona Vrancea, zona de curbură a munților Carpați, este o zonă unde se produc periodic cutremure de pământ.
Luminous aerial phenomena have been observed during some earthquakes. Most recently, during the 2009 L'Aquila earthquake in Italy.
We have a very good study in Aquila. They collected hundreds of sightings of different light phenomena before and after the earthquake.
It's thought that earthquake lights could result from intense electrical fields created by the tectonic movement of some rocks. But for this natural phenomenon to be the catalyst in Nanești, the region should have experienced seismic activity.
Tocmai trebuie specificat faptul că în perioada respectivă, în anul 2001 și de fapt în ultimii 10-15 ani, poate chiar mai mult, în zona Vrancea nu s-au produs cutremure de intensitate mare.
In Nanești, some witnesses see a red glow high in the sky.
When I first heard about the red light in the sky, my first thought was the planet Mars. And if you look at where Mars was, it was visible at that time. It was at its closest to the Earth and it was very bright. And it set at midnight, so that would correspond with the timings and the red colour.
But as the witnesses testified, there is more to this event than a simple glowing light.
Aceasta fiind sfera și apoi acesta fiind primul cerc, dar care este întrerupt. Al doilea din ce în ce mai mare, al treilea și mai mare, al patrulea și mai mare și, să spunem, ultimul care ne atinge pe noi.
Huge bands of light moving in patterns around the sky may seem like a surreal phenomenon, but Nigel Henbest believes there may be a rational scientific explanation.
One other explanation could be the aurora, the northern lights. These are shifting patterns of lights that you get above the Earth's North Pole.
The aurora borealis, or northern lights, occur when charged particles emitted from the sun interact with the Earth's magnetic field. They erupt in spectacular displays of coloured lights, but these sights are usually restricted to northern parts of the globe. Could they possibly be seen as far south as Romania?
When the sun heats up, as it does every 11 years, the aurora get bigger and brighter and they spread southwards, so you can see them from the more southern latitudes in Europe. It would be very rare to see the aurora from Romania, but 2001 was a period when the sun was very active, so there could have been a very bright aurora which you could see from Romania.
An aurora in a remote part of Europe, not used to such sights, could explain why locals were so bewildered.
That would be such a rare sight, it really would astound you. You would be absolutely gobsmacked by seeing this bright red shimmering curtain of light.
But other events of the night remain equally uncertain. According to witnesses, the power failure is localized to the village of Nanești, exactly where the light phenomenon is spotted.
Ei au văzut în momentul acela că deasupra satelor vecine era lumină. Deci curentul era întrerupt doar în satul lor.
And it appears that the two events occur almost simultaneously.
Atunci când am întrebat la ce oră a revenit curentul, răspunsul a fost după ora 1. Iar ultima persoană care a văzut fenomenul luminos deasupra satului a fost, și acesta a spus că ultima dată a văzut fenomenul la ora 1 sau în jurul orei 1 noaptea.
But when investigators approached the power company for details of the blackout, their response only deepens the mystery.
The electricity company has some safety devices and measuring devices. If something happens in the network, they will report, and they did not report anything abnormal.
The company has no record of the blackout. Stranger still, the village has two electricity supply lines. It is unheard of for both to go down at the same time. But for the bride's mother, the power cut is all too real.
Ne-am convins că a fost un OZN, nu a fost o mână de om criminal, a fost ceva care nu putea să facă un om, deci ceva, un corp străin așa.
And locals remain intrigued by what they consider to be a unique and astonishing event.
Că mă consider norocos. Poate, într-un fel, am fost martorul unei povești pe care încă nu ne-o putem explica. Mâine, poi mâine, poate.